Okay. So we're gonna get started. 大家好，这里是比较政策分析期刊的Journal of Comparative Policy Analysis 的微信公众号。那我们开设这个公众号呢，是为了让更多的海内外学者能够更好的了解 JCPA 以及它所倡导的比较视野下的公共政策研究。那我是清华大学公共管理学院的刘志玲，也是 JCPA 的联合主编之一。为了让大家更好的了解 JCPA， 今天我们非常荣幸的请到了JCPA 的执行主编来自加拿大麦吉尔大学的 Daniel Béland 教授。Hello everyone, this is the WeChat account for Journal of Comparative Policy Analysis. So we launched this account to communicate with scholars in and outside of China to better understand the mission of JCPA and the field of comparative policy research. My name is Zhilin Liu. I'm a professor in the School of Public Policy and Management at Tsinghua University and also a JCPA co-editor. So today we're very happy to invite JCPA's executive editor, Professor Daniel Béland from McGill University, Canada, to share his thoughts and advice on publishing in JCPA. So hi, Professor Béland. Thank you very much for agreeing to do this interview.
Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, so maybe first of all, can you please introduce briefly the aims and scope of JCPA, and in particular, what types of research is JCPA interested in publishing?
Yes, so we are the Journal of Comparative Policy Analysis, and we are the major journal in the field of comparative policy studies. So we are especially interested in comparative papers that can be written from different angles. Methodologically, we are interested in qualitative and quantitative research methods, and also in mixed methods. So we are open about different methods that are used by policy researchers from all around the world. We are interested in different theoretical perspectives, and we have, of course, special interest in interdisciplinary submissions. So people who combine the lens of different disciplines. We also have special issues and non-thematic issues. So we do welcome submissions, individual submissions for non-thematic issues, for general issues, and we also welcome proposals for special issues. And the special issues can be on a number of different topics. They can focus on methodological aspects of comparative policy analysis, theoretical aspects, or specific policy areas, or even regions of the world. It's important also to understand, mentioning the regions of the world, that our journal, JCPA, is global, and that we welcome submissions from people located all over the world. And also, we now have recently developed new sections to advance scholarship in specific areas of comparative policy analysis, including qualitative methods and quantitative methods. So these sections are spelled out. They are described on the journal's website. And so you can go to look at these sections to see whether maybe your work will fit into the topic of the section. And then you could contact the editors of that section to see whether they will be interested in reviewing your work in the area.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So it's good to know the new sections that JCPA made available. So maybe at the end of the interview, at the end of the video, we will post the web link of JCPA so that everybody can see. So, and also it's good to know that JCPA is very much open in terms of methodology, both qualitative and quantitative and mixed method. So I'm sure a lot of scholars will be interested in. And now you also mentioned the comparative aspect, because the journal is titled as Comparative Policy Analysis. So, but sometimes I often got sort of questions, inquiries from some scholars who thought that this has to be cross-country comparison. So can you sort of clarify a little bit on that, sort of elaborate what JCPA has in mind in terms of comparison?
Yes, comparisons can take different forms, and cross-national comparisons, comparing countries, different countries, say comparing China with the United States, or comparing Mexico with Brazil. These studies, of course, are important for comparative policy analysis as a field, but there are other ways you can compare policies. You can compare them at the subnational level, for example. You can compare different cities within the same countries, or cities across different countries, and compare them. Or you can compare the provincial level within the same country, say within China, or compare what's happening in a province of China with what's happening in a region of another country. And so there are different ways you can compare. You can also compare different policy areas. And so you don't have to necessarily to study multiple countries, but if you do, you can do that in different ways, and you can focus not just on the national level, but you can also decide to work on the subnational level. And so there are different ways you can compare policies, and I think people have to be aware of that. Also, in terms of what you compare, it can be small n comparison, right? Where you compare 2 or 3 cities, or 2 or 3 countries, but you can also, of course, do large n quantitative analysis, focusing on a large number of cases.
Okay, thank you. So also, I know that JCPA has pretty high desk rejection rate. So can you, as an executive editor, sort of share with us some of the common mistakes that you find when in those manuscripts that get the desk rejected by JCPA?
Yes. So some of them are desk rejected because they are really off topic. That is, they are not really about public policy. So obviously, you have to make sure that your paper is about public policy. But another important mistake that's quite common is that you receive papers that are comparative and they are about public policy, but they don't speak to the broader policy literature, especially the one on comparative policy analysis. So I think it's important, before you submit to JCPA, to read, really to go on our website, and to, of course, read the aims and scope section of our website. But more important, or as important, I would say, try to look at some of the papers published in recent issues of the journal, and to get a feel for what we actually publish. So look at more than one issue, 2 or 3 issues, and especially if you want to submit just an individual paper for a non-thematic issue, then look at non-thematic issues published in the journal. If you're interested in submitting a special issue proposal, then look at recent recent special issues, thematic issues of the journal, to see what we have published in recent years in the journal as special issues, because it will give you a very good idea of what we are interested in, and also what's the state of the field, right? And how you want to make an intervention within that field of comparative policy analysis. So it's important to engage with recent scholarship in the field of public policy, especially comparative policy analysis. And one way to discover that field is, of course, to look at previous publications in our journal, but also in other policy journals.
So the key is really to, before submission, to read the aims and scope, and really to engage with the scholars and the audience of the journal. And this is not just for JCPA, it's sort of recommended whenever a scholar is trying to submit to any journal, is to really understand the journal.
That's right. And we have specific guidelines about what to do when you submit the paper. So you have also to follow these guidelines. And there are things even about, having the words, say, comparative or comparison in the title or subtitle, and specific things that are distinct to JCPA. So you have to read the instructions carefully before you submit.
Okay. Now, if I may go back to the new sections created by JCPA. So I want to follow up on that, the sort of any specific requirements or expectations, the format of articles that to be submitted to those new sections compared to the regular research articles?
Yes, I think that what's important here with these new sections, they are really recent, right? They were just created. So I think that the best, if you're interested in one of the sections that are listed on our website, you will also find information about who are editing these sections. And soon we are starting to publish short introductory pieces to explain what these sections are about. So in forthcoming issues, people will get more information about what is expected in terms of submissions in these sections. So it's really very much a work in progress. But if you're interested in one of the sections, my advice is to contact at least one of the editors or all the editors of that section and ask them, well, is it something that you would be interested in, even before you start writing the paper? Because these are, for these sections, these are shorter papers, right? So 6,000 words, which is significantly shorter than our regular articles. And so I think that, the editors of these sections will also commission pieces to different authors. So if you're interested in contributing to one of these sections, I think my advice is to contact the editors of that section.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you very much for that advice. Now, as you also mentioned just now, and also I noticed that in the last few years, JCPA is actively seeking to become more internationalized, welcome editorial board members and welcoming papers from around the world. So I'm just asking on behalf of a lot of scholars from China, Asia, maybe other developing regions, how do you think they can sort of better frame their research to engage with the audience of JCPA and possibly make a theoretical contribution?
Yes, I think it's important to try to make a broader contribution to the field of public policy research, especially comparative policy analysis, that transcends your own country or your own policy area or the cases that you study. So purely empirical contributions that don't make a broader theoretical and methodological contributions can be welcomed under some circumstances, but typically and especially in the context of a special issue, a thematic issue. But for our general submissions, I think that the most important thing is to have a paper that will have could have a broader readership, so that people who don't necessarily work on your policy area or your country or the countries under investigation could still be interested in it. So what are the general lessons that can be drawn in terms of policy practice, in terms of theory, in terms of methodology, that other scholars that don't necessarily work on your topic or your country or the countries you study, that they can still benefit from, right? So try to see what's the general message of the paper for scholars all around the world, and not just people who work in your area, and especially in the countries you study. So if you write a paper about China, it would be important to try to stress what's your general contribution to comparative policy analysis and or practice. And it's the same thing if you write an article about the United States, right? Why is it important for people who study comparative policy analysis and don't necessarily care about the United States? Why should they read the paper? So I think it's valid for all the countries out there, not just for countries in Asia or for China. I think if I was going to talk to people in France or people in Mexico or people in Ghana, I would tell them the exact same thing.
Yeah, so I sort of, my take from your answer is to think about a question that is not limited to that particular policy issue or particular country or region, right?
That's right. And I think that there is a lot of commonalities and there are differences, of course, among countries and policy areas and so forth. But I think that we have to find some common ground. So how does your paper contribute to the field, the literature or policy practice beyond your cases? And that is something that we should do. And it's not just about this journal. It's, in all policy journals, we have to think about the big picture. I always try to go back to the big picture, right? And how people from all over the world can engage with your work and benefit from it.
Great point. So you mentioned scholars from China. I'm sure you get a lot of submissions from China, other non-English speaking countries. So in addition to the mistakes that you just mentioned, any particular sort of mistakes that you often find from China?
Well, I think the quality of the writing is important, and it's a challenge for non-English speakers. I'm not an English speaker myself. It's not my mother tongue, right? My mother tongue is French, and I have a French accent, and I struggled at first to write in English, and I needed some help. You know, I started with working with a copy editor and so forth. Now I don't need a copy editor, but I still ask colleagues to look at my work before I submit it. So get other people to read your work, especially if they are already fluent in English. If you can also use the latest software in terms of copy editing, that is very helpful. But take the language seriously. And of course, people whose mother tongue is not English, especially people who come from, Asian countries or Arabic-speaking countries where the language is quite their mother tongue is quite far from English, they start with a disadvantage. But I think that it's possible to transcend that disadvantage and in a way make it into an advantage in the sense that you can develop a very clear language that will also be accessible to people whose mother tongue is not English, because how hard it is to learn a foreign language, and I think you can develop a very clear way of writing in English. It doesn't have to be fancy, right? It has to be clear, and I know people whose mother tongue is not English, and who struggled at first, and now they write better than many scholars whose mother tongue is English. In part because these scholars don't necessarily take into account the fact that other people might struggle to read what they have to say. And so I think it's worth investing a lot in the quality of the writing.
Yeah, so thank you for the very encouraging message. Now to conclude our interview, so any additional advice from your perspective as executive editor in terms of the submission review, and particularly for a lot of young scholars from Asia who are thinking of submitting to JCPA? So any additional advice?
Well, one thing I have to say is that obviously the field of policy research in Asia has really exploded over the last quarter century, especially the last 10 or 15 years. So there is a dramatic expansion of the field, including the field of comparative policy analysis in China and elsewhere in Asia. So I think that we need contributions from Asian scholars, not just people who study Asia, but people who are based in Asia. And we also we welcome queries if people are not sure whether their paper is a good fit. They could write to me or some of the section editors I mentioned earlier, or the special issue editor if they are interested in a special issue. There is nothing wrong about asking, right, before you submit. And you can also just submit, and if the paper is desk rejected, normally there should be a rationale for it. But don't get discouraged if your paper is rejected. Desk rejected, or if it's rejected after the reviews are in, because the process normally is that we decide whether we send the article out for review or not. And if we send the article out for review, of course, it's reviewed by at least 2 reviewers, and then we get back to the authors with the reviews and a decision. If the decision is negative and the paper is rejected, don't get discouraged. You can revise the paper using the reviews and then submit it to another journal. So don't give up on a paper unless the cost of revising the paper is higher than the cost of writing a new paper from scratch. That's my law, in a way, the way I think about this. So papers, the first time around, it might not be accepted for publication, but don't give up on it if you believe in it and you think that the feedback you receive could be helpful to improve it over time, and then submit it elsewhere.
Thank you. I see 2 very important messages. One is don't hesitate to write to editors. Probably you will get messages, Daniel yourself, we will get messages, inquiry letters to editors. It doesn't hurt to ask, make inquiries. And second, don't get discouraged by rejection, either desk reject or review after first round of review. The authors tend to get very useful comments from reviewers. So don't get discouraged. So with that, I'm going to conclude with our interviews. But finally, this is a Zoom interview, but we would very much like to welcome you to visit China at some point in the future, to visit the editorial office at Tsinghua, and also to meet probably some of the scholars who are in the field of comparative public policy. So thank you very much, and we look forward to meet you in the future in person.
You're most welcome. I've been to China twice already, and I'm sure I will return to China in the near future.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. 再见.
Yeah.